Welcome to Future Squared, the podcast all about corporate innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-empowerment. Future Squared brings you a double dose of innovation inspiration every week to help you and your company stay relevant in an era of rapid change and 10x your results in both your professional and personal life. Each week, I'll bring you corporate innovators, entrepreneurs, authors, keynote speakers, and thought leaders such as Steve Blank, David Allen, Brad Feld, Tim Harford, Karen Dillon, Jenny Blake, Neil Patel, Rand Fishkin, Pascal Finette, Ryan Blair, and Ash Moria, to name just a few. While every Friday, I'll bring you Fast Fix Friday, some quick, digestible insights to help you end your week on a high as you head off for the weekend. Future Squared is brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation hub school and consultancy based in Melbourne, Australia and Singapore that works with companies to help them adopt the mindset, methods and tools to navigate change and survive and thrive in an era of rapid disruption. If your organization needs help coming up with ideas, testing and turning ideas into reality, incubating teams, driving cultural change, or connecting and partnering with startups, then visit www.collectivecamp.us. And without further ado, here's today's podcast. Welcome back to Future Squared. Today I bring you Jordan Harbinger. He's an entrepreneur, talk show host, and world-renowned social dynamics expert. As co-founder of The Art of Charm, Jordan has helped deliver one of the leading self-development programs in the world, with a special expertise in social capital, relationship building, and authentic rapport. He's also the host of the Art of Charm podcast, where he interviews leading entrepreneurs, celebrities, writers, and experts about psychology, performance, life, and success. For all his work in the field, Forbes named Jordan one of the 50 best relationship builders in the world, and Inc. magazine recently called him the Charlie Rose of podcasting. Jordan has shared his ideas around the world as a speaker and consultant. His work has been presented in Silicon Valley at companies such as Google, Apple, Twitter, and Square, and to various government branches and agencies, including all branches of the US military, the Department of State, and the Department of Defense. He has also given talks on security, social engineering, and psychology to Black Hat, DEF CON, and Harvard Business School, and has advised private companies and law enforcement agencies on their security and communications. A former US State Department employee and Wall Street attorney who speaks 5 languages, Jordan has spent several years abroad in Europe and the developing world, including South America, Eastern Europe, the Balkans, and the Middle East. He has worked for various governments and NGOs overseas, traveled through war zones, led several trips through North Korea, and has been kidnapped twice. The only reason he's still alive and kicking is because of his ability to talk his way into and out of just about any situation. So with that, please join me as I welcome to the show the one and only Jordan Harbinger. Welcome to the show, Jordan.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Not a problem. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I mean, it's actually an honor to have what I consider podcasting royalty on the show. And speaking of being podcasting royalty, congrats on what has been a milestone year with the Art of Charm podcast in its 10th year now, with almost 1,000 episodes and over 3.4 million listeners.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. You know, been growing the show 11 years. It's about time to see some results from that. It's a slow thing. And I think podcasting is really a tricky space because it's very hard to grow a show to that size. It's probably the hardest medium in which to do that. And I used to wish, I wish I did YouTube or something like that because it'd be so much bigger. But actually, the platform has its ups and downs, and it's actually really the benefits outweigh the negatives, but it does take a long time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we see a lot of podcasts coming and going. People get all excited at the prospect of, hey, I'm going to start this podcast. I'm going to jump on iTunes rather. It's going to be accessible by people all over the world. And then they realize just how much work goes into it. So to have actually stuck around for 10 years and released, like I said, almost 1,000 episodes speaks volumes of your persistence in the space.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's partially negligence and not having checked for everything and, paying attention to the stats and things like that. And really just I love having conversations and chatting with smart people. So that made it easier to be consistent. But I still don't recommend it as a platform for people who just want to who just want to become a thought leader, whatever the hell that means.
Yeah, couldn't agree more on that. And as a fellow podcaster, I would say the number one thing I get out of podcasting, despite the lead generation that we get, it's just connecting with people that you normally wouldn't have the ability to connect with, and also just learning a hell of a lot. So let's go back 13 years, Jordan, to 2004. You spent some time as a self-proclaimed overpaid intern at Linklaters in 0405. You're an associate at Thatcher, Prophet and Wood shortly thereafter. How did you come to make the move from the world of legal services to podcasting and becoming, quote unquote, thought leader in the space of relationships and building social capital?
Right. So I was an attorney at Linklaters and later Thatcher, Prophet and Wood, and I had coasted through school. Essentially, the whole high school, college experience was, well, I'm kind of smart, so I'll be able to figure this stuff out. And then later on in college, it was like, oh, everybody's smart. So I then switched from being focusing on my natural intelligence, and I put that in air quotes because, I'm no genius here, but just basically being able to coast by on exams, to being able to outwork everyone because everybody was smart in college, but they were also drinking a lot. So it was like, well, okay, I'll just focus on being the guy who doesn't get wasted all the time, and we should be good to go. And so I worked on that. That was my competitive advantage. But then once I got to Wall Street, it turned out, actually, it's not just that I can outwork everyone. It's not just that I can do this on my own in terms of like focusing on things. Everybody's willing to work. Everybody's smart. So what do I do? And that became a really tricky sort of way to look at things because my competitive advantage is essentially evaporated at that point. And so I started to get worried and think it's only a matter of time until they figure this out and fire me. And that's a little bit of scary imposter syndrome type situation, but that's where I was at the time. That's when I started to ask questions and think like, how do I get out of this? And the guy who hired me, his name was Dave. And Dave was never in the office. And I thought, well, good. I really want to focus on what Dave's doing because everyone says Dave's the man. He's never in the office. I got to figure this out because maybe if I don't have to come to the office, I won't get fired. That was kind of my strategy. And so Dave took me out for coffee one day and he said, all right, ask me whatever you want. I said, okay, how come you're never in the office, but you're a partner? How does that work? Do you work from home? And he said, oh man, I bring in all the deals. Yeah. And so I'm very curious to hear what, who's talking about that in the office. And I thought, oh, well, oops, I'm not going to rat anybody out here, but I want to know how you bring in deals. And he said, well, it's about relationships. And I go and I hang out with investment bankers and I do jiu-jitsu and I play golf and all this stuff. And I thought, wait a second, that doesn't look like work. And he kind of explained to me that bringing in deals revolves around relationships and relationships are how the firm gets deals. And I didn't really get that. I just thought you worked really hard. You made your way to the top of the corporate ladder and then, you get deals and relationships somehow and you meet the other people because you're initiated into some secret club. And then you got those deals coming in and then you're a partner and your salary goes up the end. No, it was kind of the opposite. It was he knew a ton of people, had a ton of connections. So he would bring in deals and then therefore they promoted him early to partner. And he was more valuable outside the firm than he was inside the firm because he was able to go out and bring in deals, whereas everybody else was only as valuable as they were able to bill per hour. Lawyers bill in 6-minute increments and sort of by the hour, if you will. And so those guys can only bill what the market would sustain. But Dave was worth whatever the amount of the deal he could bring in. And that was like, wait, what? That meant instead of billing out at $800 an hour, which is a huge amount, he was actually worth something more along the lines of, I don't know, $2,000-$3,000 an hour, except for those hours were spent on the golf course instead of looking over SEC filings. So I wanted that job, right? Yeah. That was more exciting. And that was something where I thought, maybe I can do that and maybe I can learn that. Because by the time everybody else figures out that they need to be focusing on this kind of thing, I will already have a 3 to 5 year advantage focusing on relationships and things like that. And I thought, all right, that's what I'm going to do. Like that is what I want to focus on. And so that was where I got the idea. And then, of course, the economy tanked and I'd already started talking about body language, nonverbal communication, and the little pieces that go into relationship development and networking. And that's what later became the art of charm.
That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, soft skills is a funny thing because it's one of those things where once you enter the corporate world, you may have some soft skills training. And oftentimes people disregard it and think, oh, soft skills are going to learn us how to, speak in public or build relationships and stuff like that. But ultimately, people tend to focus on the technical skills, the hard skills. Like if I'm a consultant at a large firm, I want to learn about the technology and I want to learn about, financial risk management and term sheets and all sorts of stuff. But when we have these soft skills training, people tend to overlook it and sneer and whatnot. And effectively today, soft skills are probably the most important thing you can do. And not even today. I mean, the example you gave from 13 odd years ago, it was the partners at the top of the firm making all the money, bringing in all the deals, spending time on the golf course, not because they were great at, say, they were great in the courtroom, but they were great building relationships outside of the courtroom.
Exactly. And that was news to me. That changed the way that I look at work forever because it didn't make sense that somebody could just get deals. I mean, that was outside my reality. I thought you got deals because people your firm had a reputation for doing good work, and then they, I don't know, found your phone number in the yellow pages. I mean, bear in mind, I'm 24, 26 years old at this point.
Yeah.
I don't know how people generate business. What the hell? That's something you learn when you're 60. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, totally. If it was like 1975. But that's completely right. And your show discusses skills that people can develop to become more well-rounded, craft deeper relationships. But aside from what people can develop, I mean, what's one thing you see that people often get wrong when it comes to the subtle art of winning friends and influencing people, if I'm to quote Dale Carnegie?
Sure. So one thing I think people do wrong now that I know people do wrong is they focus on they don't focus on digging the well before they're thirsty. Let me put it that way. So they say things like, oh, well, I really don't want to be seen as somebody sleazy, so I don't want to reach out to people and network. But the reason that feels sleazy is because they're reaching out to people when they need something, which is kind of sleazy.
Yeah.
So then we talk about, well, dig the well before you're thirsty. Reach out to people and help them when you don't need anything. And what we call that here is ABG. We call that ABG over at Art of Charm. ABC, always be closing. You ever heard that? Like,
yeah.
A, B, C. So we call it ABG, always be giving. And what that means is constantly be on the lookout for ways that you can help other people. And when you do so, you'll find that when you need to reach out to them for help, it's no problem. It's a no-brainer. They can't wait to help you because you've helped them with so many other things. And so the way that I try to do ABG as much as possible is I'm always on the lookout for people that are new that I meet. Who can I introduce them in my network that they could help with, that could help them with something? Or I look at my Facebook feed and, if somebody has a new event, I might text them or write them an email instead of just clicking like on their picture, or whatever it is. I might say something like, oh, I heard it looks like you're planning a trip to Brussels. I've got friends there. Do you want me to make an intro? Things like that are great ways to sort of ABG and dig the well before you're thirsty. That way you don't have to worry about feeling sleazy when you need to reach out and ask for help. Another concept that I think is overlooked that most people do wrong is they're looking for opportunities for themselves, and you can't see the opportunities that are over the horizon. And what I mean by that is that you are always, if you're not ABG, you're looking for those opportunities for yourself, what you can get out of it. And the problem is you can't really tell who can help you, and you can't tell who you can help right away unless you're following the ABG system here. And the way that I got a story about that I can tell, which is that when I first moved to LA, I had a toothache, and I was just like, oh, crap. When you get a toothache, the pain is just like it's in your brain. You got to take care of it right away. And I posted on Facebook in desperation because I was calling dentists and I couldn't get an appointment. Oh, go to the ER. We don't take your insurance. Oh, go to the ER. Go to the ER. We don't take new patients. But I knew that if you go to the ER, they're just going to tie a string around it and tie the other end to a doorknob and slam the door or whatever. So I didn't want to go to the ER and have it taken care of. So like I said, I posted on Facebook in desperation, and this guy told me, hey, look, my aunt's a dentist. She's in your area. And I don't even know who this person was. It wasn't a friend of mine. It was, privacy settings fail. Some random stranger saw that post on Facebook. So I said, yeah, please. So calls his aunt, sets up an appointment for me, and I go there and get my tooth fixed. And I could not be happier. This was phenomenal. I'm so glad that this is just over with, and taken care of. So I email him and I say, thanks so much. If there's anything I can do, let me know. Of course, he writes back, hey, I'm a graphic designer. I'm looking for work. I don't have any work for a graphic designer, but I say, I'll keep my ear to the ground for you. I whatever. I don't have any work for you. I do my stuff in-house, but thanks. Sorry this didn't work out as a direct trade, quid pro quo. And he said, yeah, sure, fine. A couple days later, another entrepreneur writes out to me and says, your website looks great. I keep having designers flake. Do you know anyone? Well, I don't have anybody that I can hook you up with. Again, I do this all in-house, but this random guy who seems really nice, who helped me find a dentist, he did send me his portfolio, and it looks respectable. Do you want to take a look? Happy to make the intro. He's a very, generous person with his time, and I assume he's going to be equally communicative. And I know he's jonesing to get into graphic design full time instead of working at this cafe. And so I sent him over the portfolio, and that guy ended up getting a job with this entrepreneur, and they're partners essentially now in this website design business. And he was able to quit his other job that he didn't want at this cafe because he broke into that industry.
Yeah.
And that's really an amazing story, because if he had sent his portfolio to literally everybody that he'd ever met in his whole life, I wouldn't have been on that list. So he wouldn't have gotten that intro to that entrepreneur that was looking for somebody who could work in this particular niche. And so he couldn't have known that by giving me a dentist hookup that he was going to end up with a full-time job. Neither of us could possibly have known that. But since he gave freely, and then I later gave reciprocation freely because it happened to cross my path, he got really lucky. But he would not have gotten lucky if he had never reached out in the first place to help me selflessly find a dentist.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the opportunities are over the horizon, and the only way you can really find them is to ABG, and do so without looking for an opportunity for yourself in the mix.
Yeah, and that's the key thing that I was just going to say, is doing things without the hope that you get something in return immediately.
Exactly. You can't look for what's in it for you at that time, because you won't see the not just because it's sort of sleazy or whatever, but because you literally will not be able to find the opportunity because it's not there yet. It basically materializes only later on as a result of having this person already in your network. And on that same note, the other thing that you really can't do, the other thing that shoots people in the foot along the same token as not being able to see opportunities over the horizon, is that you can't keep score. And that is essentially what a lot of folks do, which is they keep score as in, well, I introduced Tom to this guy and I introduced Steve to this guy. That guy owes me something. Or those Steve and Tom owe me something. And that doesn't work because it creates what we call covert contracts. And covert contracts are, well, I did Steve's show, so Steve, he has to do my show now. And it's like, well, no, that wasn't really the agreement. But since I'm looking at this like you did something for me or I did something for you, I'm creating a covert contract where in my mind you now owe me one. And if I keep doing that with you over and over and over, since it's a covert contract and that you don't know your side of the obligation, after a while I start to get mad at you, right? You're not fulfilling the other end of this invisible bargain that we have.
Yeah.
And that's very problematic because when I get angry at you, you don't know why. And eventually it poisons the well. It poisons the relationship. And I might start saying negative things like, oh, yeah, I've had Steve on my show like 3 times. He never had me on his show. What a jerk. Right. And you, meanwhile, you don't even know what's going on. You're just like, why is Jordan mad at me? Or why did Jordan say a nasty thing about me? Or why is Jordan not answering my email anymore? So it's kind of like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Yeah. And that's not good at all. And that happens when you keep score because the other person doesn't think they owe you one. They just think, oh, he gives so freely. What a great guy. But after a while, I'm secretly pissed at you. And it causes a deeper rift in our relationship. That's a serious, serious problem. So you got to ABG, always be giving, but you got to give freely. It has to actually be truly no strings attached because 9 times out of 10, you might even get the shaft, right? You might end up not getting a benefit right away within a year from that same person. And that's okay. You have to be okay with that because when you do eventually get a benefit, it ends up being a huge win oftentimes. And if you help 100 people because you're doing this in a scalable way, just making introductions or something like that, then you can afford to help 100 people and only have 10 people help you in return. It's still a good ROI for your time.
Yeah, it couldn't agree more. And on reciprocity, how does that align with what Robert Cialdini talks about in Influence, where he more or less positions it whereby if I do something for someone, then they will feel obligated to do something back. And what you're saying is that's not necessarily the case. You should do something for someone because you should always be giving A, B, G, regardless of whether or not that person does something for you. Otherwise, that resentment's going to build. And I think it was a Mark Twain quote that you mentioned there, resentment is like swallowing poison expecting the other person to die. And
right.
Effectively, you should just do it because you want to do it. You want to be giving. And if something comes back eventually, great.
Exactly. Yeah. And even in the example that Cialdini gives in the book Influence, which is a great, great book, the reciprocity factor at work is that the example is, I think it's like Buddhist monks are giving out flowers.
Yeah.
And then they know that they give you these flowers and that, or Hindu or whatever, priests, and they know that you'll give a donation because they just gave you this flower because you feel this pressure. But they're also going in the garbage can to collect the flowers because they know most people just throw them away and don't value them.
Yeah.
But not everybody feels obligated, or if they do, not everybody actually does give. And they're totally fine playing the numbers game. And that's exactly what I'm encouraging you to do, and is do the exact same thing where you might help everyone freely in return. And some people may feel obligated to reciprocate, and some people might not be able to, even if they feel obligated, and other people might not feel obligated at all. But there's going to be a certain percentage of people that do. The trick is you just don't know who those people are. You have to find them by playing the numbers game.
Makes perfect sense. And this ties in perfectly to one of the other things I wanted to talk about, Jordan. Traditionally, say we're going back to 1975, we'd probably spend a lot of time out at big networking events and whatnot. And while that's still prevalent today, if you're a young technology company, or even if you're a large corporate who's testing new ideas, chances are you're doing a lot of that stuff online. And we kind of teetered on the edge there, talking about contacting people online, not only liking their posts but sharing them and writing them an email saying, "Hey, I really enjoyed your post," and so on. How does one go about creating a positive first impression online, where things like body language are obviously not so prevalent unless it's a video of some kind? And what should we be thinking about when building our brands online and trying to establish that initial contact?
Sure. When we're building our brands online, I think really the primary way to build a great first impression is just to be super professional, but not aloof and not so stoic, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
There's a fine line between being professional and being stuffy. And so for me to create a great first impression online, I try to get people to at some point view a bit of my work or something like that. And I'd like to have my reputation precede me. So ideally, I get a warm introduction. And I think a lot of people try to reach out cold, and they're like, I got this really well-worded email. And it doesn't matter as much as if you get introduced via email by somebody that person knows. So I always focus on trying to figure out who that person knows. And I'll look through social media, LinkedIn, Facebook. I'll try to find out if we have any mutual friends, and I will ask that person for an introduction. And that's huge because there's just no replacement, no cold email with cool guy speak in it or professional speak in it is ever going to be nearly as good as something you would get but with just somebody that I already know reaching out and recommending you. So I always try to do that. There's really no substitute for the warm introduction.
Yeah, and if people don't have mutual contacts, then there's no reason why they can't start to build their networks online, get onto LinkedIn, start connecting with people that they may have some sort of mutual interests in. Maybe they've gone to the same school, maybe they have some mutual contacts already, maybe they follow the same influencers online, maybe they're part of the same LinkedIn group. There's lots of things that they can do on a daily basis. You can add something like 75 people, I think it is, on LinkedIn to build that network. And then over time, you'll find that, hey, the number of mutual contacts I have is just growing and growing. And if I find someone, chances are there's a second contact there that can introduce me.
Exactly. I always try to go through warm intros. There's really almost no reason why I would ever not do a warm introduction. I don't understand why anyone would want to do that.
Yeah.
At all. I understand why you might have to reach out cold, but it's really the amount of effort that it would take to get somebody to respond to a proper cold email really, really, really is it's going to be less in effort over time if you just create the right relationships to get the people that you want and get a hold of them and get a warm introduction. In the short run, it's easier just to reach out cold. Of course, it takes 15 minutes to craft an email, even a really, really great one. But over time, your success rate is going to be so much higher with warm introductions that it's worth building.
Yeah. Yeah, no, great insight for our audience. And Jordan, I wanted to touch on something which I personally have struggled with since I was probably in my early 20s. So I've always been a bit of a self-development, personal development type of junkie. You know, started out reading The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People when I was something like 21. And I guess I've always struggled with putting things into practice while, say, projecting a natural flow. Because the moment you look like you're trying to remember a tactic or a strategy, you probably come across somewhat robotic, you probably come across somewhat creepy, and you're doing yourself a big disservice. So how do we go about applying these things without coming across like a robot?
Well, it really doesn't. People ask that all the time, and I don't understand how you could seem robotic if you are applying something online. I mean, I guess maybe I don't fully understand.
No, I don't necessarily mean online. I mean, if you're, say, building a relationship out with someone, say you've got your first meeting with a potential client, you know, and you're thinking about things like, say, body language and how should I sit and what should I say and how do I build rapport and what things should I say and what kind of questions do I ask and that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. There's absolutely no way to do it without coming across like a robot unless you practice.
Yeah.
And that's really the chief takeaway is that a lot of people learn things like body language and nonverbal communication, and then they don't practice it. So, of course, it comes across super weird when they're trying to do it in the moment. So things that we do at Art of Charm are we have a lot of drills and exercises on the show, for example, that relegate nonverbal communication to the level of habit so that you no longer have to think about it. Because when you're thinking about it and in the moment, it's not going to come across. You're not going to be present. You're not going to be able to come across anything other than slightly forced. So this is called the doorway drill, and this is a drill that we do at AOC that is super powerful. It's just an example of things that we do, and it sort of translates well to the radio format. So you can't manage your nonverbal communication without coming across as not present. And so we have to relegate it to the level of habit. And the way that the doorway drill works is this. If you stand up, unless you're driving right now, it's stand up straight, chin up, chest back, shoulders up and back, and a smile on your face. And you don't have to exaggerate this. It's just literally stand up straight, chest up, chin up, smile on your face, shoulders back, okay? So it's just standard, open, positive body language. And you can try that right now. And if you know the way that this feels, great. Now, what we want to do is we want to do this every time we walk through a doorway, just reset to this position. And since a lot of us are working in offices and we've got doorways even in our own house, we can practice resetting to this position dozens and dozens of times per day. And when we do that, this becomes our default nonverbal communication, open, positive body language. This means that whenever you walk into a room, of course, you're going through a doorway, you're going to reset to open, positive body language, nonverbal communication. You're doing this several dozen times throughout the day. It really does reset your nonverbal communication to a really, really powerful, but not powerful body language in that, you know, I'm a tough guy, not this fake alpha crap, but just open, positive body language. It works with men and it works with women. And so you've got this doorway drill that and I know what the problem is. People think, well, I'm not going to remember that when I walk through a door. So go get some Post-it notes, the brightly colored, sticky notes, the hot pink ones or whatever, rip them in half or into smaller pieces and stick them in the doorways in your house and in your office at eye level. And this interrupts the pattern of your sort of autopilot mode. When you're walking through your house or walking through your office, you see that and you go, why the hell is that little pink Post-it note there? Oh, right. Doorway drill. You straighten up and you'll have great nonverbal communication. And this helps because next time, like I said, when you walk into a room, when you go to a meeting, you're straightening up and you're in that position. This helps you manage that nonverbal communication. And when you have positive, open body language, people start to treat you a little differently. And when people start to treat you a little differently, Then you start to act a little bit differently because you're acting as if, which then reinforces your nonverbal communication. So you end up with a positive, virtuous cycle where you exhibit positive, powerful body language in a way that's open and friendly. People start to treat you that way, which means you start to behave and act into that role. And that is how you start to develop positive habits that you don't have to then manage and micromanage when, oh, I'm at an interview, oh, I'm at a networking event, I got to be open and positive. Oh, crap, I stopped listening to what this person said because I'm focused on my nonverbal communication. Now I'm just being a weirdo and stilted communication, right? So the doorway drill is extremely powerful because it relegates something that most of us have to manage to the level of habit, which then creates and informs the way other people treat us, which then informs and creates new behavior on our end.
And that aligns with a lot of the, I suppose, the neuro-linguistic programming stuff that the likes of Tony Robbins or Deepak Chopra teach. Is that right?
I don't think so.
No?
I think a lot of that stuff is baloney, actually.
Cool.
Yeah, I don't believe in most of that stuff. I think that stuff is designed so that, not in NLP in general, but I think a lot of the pop psychology junk that's taught by motivational speakers like that, I think is largely designed so that people who are maybe not critical thinkers and don't like to ask questions about why things work, or don't look at the science behind why things work, or the lack of science behind why things work. I think it's designed so that they go, wow, there's this really cool thing where if I say your name 3 times, you like me more now. There's just nothing to that stuff most of the time. It's largely designed so that someone can go, I'm a guru now, and release 10 books with little tricks like that, and people think this is doing something, but really it's not.
Right.
That's actually how you look like a mechanical robot. You know, you read too many self-help books and you try to implement all that stuff and you go, I got it. You just read the new What's-His-Face book. And I think a lot of that stuff is oversimplified, but it appeals really well to people who are looking for a quick shortcut. This drill works well. It is not a quick shortcut. It's going to take you months of doing this drill to start to get it as a habit. And even then, you're going to have to then constantly be refining it and making it more natural. Whereas I think a lot of that NLP stuff is kind of like learn the secrets of master persuaders. And frankly, there's just not a whole lot to it. I think it's largely like bubblegum science in that it's made up, frankly, by the people who write the books. And it's designed not to do much more than just sell the book.
All right, cool. Obviously a very strong opinion there, and you're the second pseudoscience skeptic I've had on the show in as many days. I had Massimo Pigliucci on the show recently talking about Stoicism, and he's a professor of psychology and genetics at the City University of New York and massive pseudoscience skeptic. And also I love what he said there about having an interaction with someone and they kind of catch on to the fact that you've read a particular book. And I know there was a point there in the early 2000s when Neil Strauss's The Game was a big thing, and girls would read the book. And then if a guy tried to do something from that book, like neg a girl, they're like, are you trying to game me? And it just became very predictable, and you could kind of see right through what people were trying to do.
Yeah, exactly. And so I remember when we started teaching this stuff before The Game came out, and then The Game came out, and then after that for a while, people were like, oh my God, are you worried about this at all? And I thought, no, because we're not teaching little tips and tricks and techniques. There's something quite future-proof about being a person that has a great, interesting job and has a life that they're proud of. And, you know, when you're talking about dating and things like that, and has a healthy social circle and great relationships with close friends, that's never going to be something that no woman, for example, in a dating scenario, if we're going to go with that analogy, no woman's going to go, he must have read The Game, so he has a healthy family life, great friends that do really fun things, and really good relationships with all these really healthy people who are doing things and clearly like their life. I think that's fake, right? It's not. It's only fake when you try to put on all the accoutrements of somebody that has a great life, but really your crap is in shambles, and you just picked up a copy of the latest How to BS Women handbook. And so that stuff all has a timestamp on it that will fail. Look, I love Neil Strauss, and The Game was great. It'll change a lot of people's lives. But if you're still doing that stuff now, yeah, you've got a problem. Because the point is you're supposed to fill in the background. If you just rely on the veneer that you're putting on as a result of buying a book on persuasion or NLP, or, I went to a Tony Robbins seminar, now my life's different. No, it's not. It's exactly the same as it was before you went there. You're supposed to fill in the background. You're supposed to fill in the areas that he's talking about here during these seminars. You're not just supposed to feel better about yourself for a while and then have to go to another one. That's not the idea.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
so it becomes very problematic when you're looking at that. And that's why at AOC we call this we're very different in what we teach, and with these drills and exercises. The reason they don't seem so easy is because we're talking about the subtractive process. There's something called the additive process, which is, I learned this cool new trick. I learned this cool new technique. Mm-hmm. That's bad news. The subtractive process, because it's got a timestamp on it, an expiration date. The subtractive process is better, and that's what we're focused on at AOC, because what we're looking at is, okay, how do we take away all the things that you think you're supposed to be but are really getting in the way? Oh, you've got an insecurity about maybe you feel like you're not enough, so you can't ever have a close relationship with the member of the opposite sex, or the same sex for that matter. Mm-hmm. You can't ever have an intimate relationship because you feel like you're not enough. Well, let's address that. Let's not try to figure out how you can appear much more social or charismatic from the outside, because that's only going to go so far. So we focus on the subtractive process and not the additive process. It's not about adding more bells and whistles to your personality. It's about subtracting the things that are holding you back. And that, I think, is a huge separator between, what we're talking about here and what you might get from some other sort of self-helpy things. And that's why, even though the doorway drill sounds like a really nice, compact little gimmick, it really takes months to get good at it. And that even is the most simple thing that I can transmit in a radio format. So when you put those things together, it's really a lot different than, I think, what you might hear from folks who are selling an ebook or something like that.
Yeah. Cool, man.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And most of our listeners are either entrepreneurs or corporate execs. And I guess in today's age, it's a fast-moving age where things are moving way quicker than what they were even as little as, say, 10 years ago with Moore's Law and everything else going on. I mean, it seems like just yesterday I was listening to iTunes on an iPod. Today I'm listening to Spotify on my iPhone. And tomorrow I'm probably going to say, hey, Alexa, play that song from The Breakfast Club. And it might say... it will actually play, Don't You Forget About Me by Simple Minds or something like that. And I guess becoming more adept at uncertainty is something that many managers and entrepreneurs have to do. How can people go about managing change, instability, and fear in the face of this uncertainty?
Great question. I think that managing uncertainty is really, really a tough thing that a lot of people struggle with, especially us as entrepreneurs. And, it's something that you'll struggle with whether you work for yourself or whether you work for someone else. It's sort of a fact of life right now. And I think we really need to become friendly with that level of uncertainty. My life has largely been an experiment. In fact, I wrote an article about this on The Art of Charm about uncertainty, but it's a paradox that we all deal with. We're wired to seek pleasure and avoid pain and do so as easily as possible. But really, uncertainty is kind of an integral part of life, and I think trying to avoid it is going to cause more problems than it solves. So we really need to look at what uncertainty is, why it arises, and I'm trying to think through the answer as I do it here, because this is a really good question and a tough one, in fact. I think our brains are wired to constantly seek information. We want to fill them up with information so that we have more information and we can make a better decision. But really, we can't really have complete information. And our brain, when we don't have complete information, but we have to act, it feels that uncertainty, which is a lack of comfort. So we're constantly trying to reduce the level of uncertainty. The problem is, since there's never enough information, even though we're surrounded by information at all times, it's never going to stop your brain. It's never going to stop feeling uncertain. So if we try to constantly mitigate uncertainty, we can constantly sort of asymptotally, or exponentially get more information and asymptotally end up more and more certain, but never quite fully.
Yeah.
And you have to find that perfect balance between getting information and taking action, because otherwise you will literally never do anything.
Yeah.
And does that make sense, right? The graph of information is constantly going up, but never quite reaching the far end. And on the other end, the barrier to action constantly gets smaller and smaller, but never quite closes. And so it's a function of availability of information, how much we want versus how much is available to us. No matter how much is available, we're never going to have as much as we want. A gap in information creates uncertainty, which makes it harder for us to control the world around us. And the more stability we crave, the fewer new experiences and stimuli we seek out, because we're trying to remain comfortable. So uncertainty itself is really, it's not good or bad, but it can sort of serve to enhance our emotional reaction to an event. And it becomes very, very problematic when it stops us from taking action. And so, look, I don't have a perfect answer to this, but I think stopping or not turning uncertainty into the enemy and starting to actually enjoy the process of taking action without complete information tends to be something that I think can really, really be an advantage for somebody. And you can actually really relish that as an executive, or especially as an entrepreneur, to be able to relish that risk or that uncertainty that that risk provides, or vice versa for that matter, can actually be a huge, huge advantage. For example, if you're thinking about moving to change jobs, but you're not sure if you're going to like the new town, treating it as an adventure or a stop in your life, that's going to provide a learning experience, is much better than trying to figure out if you're ever going to get complete information about that company in that town, which would cause you to never do anything new. So I would look at that and sort of use that to fuel your sense of adventure. And only you can pick how much adventure you can take, right? If you're a company, you've got shareholders, you're going to have a different appetite for adventure, right? Your action threshold is going to require a lot more information and a lot more certainty. But if you're an entrepreneur, you really do have to figure out what level of certainty you need before you can take action. And truthfully, for most of us, the level of certainty we need to be able to safely take action is far less than we're used to.
Yeah.
Our brains just don't like the feeling of leaping without seeing the net. And I agree with that. You should not leap and the net will appear. That's a meme you see on Instagram. That's something you see at a freaking, self-help seminar. But I think a lot of people, they want to make sure the net's there, and they want to make sure there's another net under that, and then they want to see what the net's made out of, and then they want to make sure that the weather's good for the jump, and then they want to make sure they bring everything with them that they need. And it's like, whoa, just make sure the net's there. You don't have to have a backpack full of rations. Does that analogy make any sense, or did I just convolute the entire thing?
No, that makes perfect sense, and it aligns perfectly with a lot of the themes that we talk about on this show when it comes to corporate innovation and startups. And there's most startups out there, they adopt the Facebook mantra, which is move fast and break things, rather than planning voraciously, spending all your time inside the building, hypothesizing about what customers may want and where the world may be going and what should we be spending money on, and coming up with a huge, overly complex, risk and control type of matrix. They just get out there. They build a really low fidelity prototype. They put it out there. They put their ego aside. They don't care if people say it's crap, but they learn from that. And they learn from that, and they make changes, and they get better. Whereas in the corporate world, what we see with a lot of companies that we work with is they've still got that 20th century lens. They're still looking at the world through that 20th century lens, which is, one where the world moved much slower, one where things were much certain, one where technology wasn't moving nearly as quickly. And while they do have shareholders and they do have risks to mitigate, they're oftentimes paralyzed because they want things to be certain. And so they may spend 6 months to 12 months planning and planning and planning, by which point the people have already skated to where the puck has gone, because it's gone somewhere else from where it was at the point when people started planning. Does that make sense?
It does. That totally makes sense. Right. You can plan your way into being too late for the opportunity.
Yeah. Exactly right. And just one other thing on creativity. I know one thing you've talked about in the past, or written about more recently actually, was about keeping our childlike curiosity intact. Our traditional institutions, whether it's university, whether it's high school or the corporate world, oftentimes they're set up in a way that, intentionally or otherwise, serves to beat the creativity out of us by the time we get to adulthood, or by the time we get to, say, our late 20s, early 30s. A lot of that passion is just beat out of people. A lot of that creativity and curiosity is beat out of people. And we run a kids entrepreneurship program, and the ideas that they come up with in that program, we're talking 9-year-olds, is just way outside the realms of what most adults would even imagine in a million years. So how do we go about keeping our childlike curiosity intact?
Yeah, well, I asked Neil deGrasse Tyson this question on The Art of Charm. You know who Neil deGrasse Tyson is?
Of course.
Is he famous outside the United States?
He's actually speaking here in a couple months.
Great. In Australia?
Yeah.
Great. So, super interesting guy. Charismatic, awesome, really, really great episode of The Art of Charm. And I asked him the same question. How do you maintain your curiosity? I wish I could say I remember verbatim his answer, but essentially he loved science, right? He said, this is a force, that I love it. I love the topic so much that I always remain curious. And he tries to mitigate outside bias, of course, and things like that when he's doing the actual science part. But being curious and staying curious, really ruining things, which is what adults are really good at, is what kills curiosity, right? If I'm interested in space, it's like, if the kid's really interested in space, don't start him off with calculus, because he's going to need this if he's going to be a rocket scientist, right? Let them focus on the parts that they're interested in, and then later that curiosity will lead them to the tools they need to solve the problems.
Yeah.
And I know that's a really, really simple answer, but I think for entrepreneurs, a lot of folks, they think, well, okay, I want to focus on what I like, but of course I need to be able to figure out complex problems. It's great. Maintaining your curiosity and solving a problem, I think a lot of people are less curious than they think. They really think, oh, I'm really interested in figuring out this problem. But really, when I dig down, when I talk to people who say they want to be entrepreneurs and things like that, it turns out they really just want to not have a boss, or it turns out they really just want to work from home. And they're not necessarily as curious or intensely interested in the business as they think they are. So that's really what it comes down to. I don't really know if you need to maintain curiosity. I think you'll constantly be curious about something. Whether or not it's the same thing, it remains to be seen. And I think people think, well, I've got to stay curious about this topic, but it's not really true. Your interests are allowed to shift. So I don't know if you need to maintain curiosity. I think you just need to listen more to the curiosity that you have. And I think a lot of people don't want to do that because they want to think that they're really passionate about music, but really they're just passionate about increasing their social status, or getting paid to travel, or being somebody that other people like. They might not really be that passionate about music. If they are, they should be doing what real musicians do, which is spending the vast majority of their time practicing things that maybe other people don't want to practice. There's a guitar player who told me this story. There's a guitar player, he's a really young guy, country music player, and he spent just weeks figuring out how to make his fingers jump really quickly from string to string. Not playing music, not playing on stage, not writing songs, not singing songs, not playing for other people, not showing off, just sitting in his living room practicing the same thing over and over and over and over again until he could really do it quickly and fast. And then he started applying it to different notes and then was practicing that over and over and over. And it was just the reporter who told me this was watching him do this and was like, how long have you been doing this? I'm working on this for these few months. And he's just these few months, he's not playing songs on his guitar. He's practicing this one technique so that he can later plug that in to other elements of his music. That's somebody who's passionate and curious about the limits of their potential in this niche. Most people think that they're passionate and curious about something, but really they just want to be on stage getting applause.
Yeah, I love that story. And what you said there about feeling like we need to maintain curiosity, even though we don't necessarily need to. I recently had Emily Wapnick on the show, who's a TED speaker and author, and she coined this term. I don't know if she coined the term, but she uses this term called multi-potentialite, where it's okay to try lots of different things. And what she said, the benefit of doing that is there's a lot more rapid learning involved when you're initially curious about something. And I see this a lot with entrepreneurs, like early stage entrepreneurs love digging their teeth into a problem and coming up with a solution. But once they find product market fit, and once they need to hire a team and think about lawyers and term sheets and scaling and all that sort of stuff, they kind of step back into the shadows, kind of like Homer Simpson stepping backwards into the bushes. You've got to identify identify what brings that out of you. And if you find something that does that, but then after a while it no longer does that, then it's fine to move on to something else.
It's funny you mentioned Emily Wapnick. 11 years ago, or 10 and a half years ago, she was the first person to write Art of Charm a fan mail.
Oh, wow.
The very first person.
How about that?
Ever. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Funny, right?
Yeah, that's bizarre.
Now she's doing her own thing, and it's so funny because, she started her thing, but she's doing it. She really is doing it. It's also, to hear her mention on a show that I'm on is pretty fun.
Yeah.
To tell her that.
That's hilarious. And it's also funny how you remember that, 10 or 11 years ago, that she was the first person to write you a fan mail. And similarly, when I was about 13 years old, you were just speaking about guitar player. I was a wannabe rock star. I had really long hair down to my butt, all that sort of stuff. And I remember writing an email to, this was when email was really new, and I wrote an email to a band overseas from Sweden, one of my favorite bands at the time, and the guy got back to me. And to this day, I remember that because I was this young kid. I didn't think I'd get a reply, but I did. And it's funny how little token gestures can mean so much, and we remember them so much after so many years.
Well, I agree.
Yeah.
I met up with her. To be fair, I met up with her and stuff like that. So it's not like I just remember her name from 11 years ago. Mm-hmm. I met up with her, after that, years later. I mean, even as recent as a few years ago, I think we had lunch in LA or something like that. But yeah, I mean, she was one of those people who wrote and kept in touch the whole time. It was
awesome. Love it, man.
Amazing.
Love it. Fantastic. Look, man, we are almost out of time. So you've left our audience with a hell of a lot of value bombs on social sciences and building relationships. But before we go, I've got to throw you into our 3-question lightning round. Jordan, are you ready to rock and roll?
Sure. Yeah.
Let's do it. So I'm not sure how you go with question 1 because you're pretty much a career entrepreneur, except for a few years in the legal space. But if you had to work for another organization, and it could be any time in the last 100 years, at any stage of that company's life cycle, who would it be and why?
Which organization would I join if I could be any stage in the company's life cycle?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Man, this is a good question. Honestly, I might work for a place like Apple. The thing is, I wouldn't want to work with Steve Jobs. That's where I'm really hung up here.
Yeah.
So Google also interests me. I would have probably been hanging out with Larry and Sergey in that kitchen, talking about the future of search in the internet. Because before Google was really a thing that people used, I remember thinking, if we could index Gopher in one place, it's called Gopher, these different universities and things like that, you'd be in these different sort of things. I was like, man, if we could connect all these and make everything searchable in one place, that would be so useful. And that's essentially what Google started off doing and has, mastered.
Yeah. And
now they got everything.
Yeah, exactly.
So early Google.
Early Google. Love it. Great answer, man. And question number 2 is, if you could ask anyone a question, dead or alive, who would it be and what would you ask?
Also a good question. I guess I'm not curious enough about singular answers.
Mm-hmm.
So I really don't even know what I would ask somebody. I mean, it would have to be somebody dead because somebody alive I can always get to.
Yeah.
But I don't have a good answer to this one because I think that I would have to ask. You really got to ask somebody ancient, right? And it's got to be somebody relevant. So, but I'm not religious, and I don't know if any of these people existed. I don't know. I don't have a good answer to this one.
Yeah, that's cool, man. We can move on to the lucky last question, which is just about rituals and routines. And, being someone who's been in the podcasting game for 10 years, obviously working with a lot of large organizations, doing all sorts of cool things. I know you've recently, well, I don't know how recent it was, but you're also hosting the Forbes List podcast. I guess I'm just curious to find out how you stay on top of your game, Jordan.
Which game are you talking about?
Well, just doing all the cool stuff you're doing in the world. I mean, do you have any daily rituals and routines?
No, I just put everything on my calendar. What's on the calendar gets done. What's not on the calendar does not get done. A lot of these morning routine things, I'm just kind of like, okay. I don't need motivation. When I wake up, I am ready to work. But I do plan my days out well in advance. And if it's on the calendar, it gets done. Every to-do lives in a place on my calendar. So it has a time to get done. And if I move something, I don't just say I'll do it later. I actually physically move it on the calendar. And it takes up an appropriate amount of time. So that stops me from getting a backlog of things I need to do someday. And it also makes sure that every day I'm actually moving forward. And that's been shockingly simple in making me more productive than what seems to be most people. I think if most people just used a calendar properly and made sure that everything has a place and time, they would be way more productive than they are now. But most people won't do that because it actually requires thought.
Yeah, exactly. Love it, Jordan. Well, look, thanks so much for being so giving today, despite having a quite the sore throat. And
Yes.
our audience can find out more about you, or they can check out the podcast, obviously, on all places that good podcasts are found. They can head to theartofcharm.com to download the podcast starter kit, the Art of Charm toolbox, and access a free online course. Is there anywhere else outside of your Twitter handle, The Art of Charm, that they should be going to connect with you or find out more?
Nah, man, the website and, of course, the podcast. You're listening to a podcast right now. That's what I would really just love to see more AOC fans. So I'm all about it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Jordan, again, for your time. You've been an awesome guest, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your night. Hope you rest up.
Thank you.
Cheers. Hey guys, it's Steve again. If you're picking up what we're putting down, we'd love it if you took just a minute of your time to like, share, or subscribe to Future Squared on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. It would mean a hell of a lot to the team here who work effortlessly to bring you thought leaders and experts on topics of corporate innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-improvement on a weekly basis. As always, you can find more resources on innovation, including blogs, books, podcasts, videos, webinars, and tools at www.collectivecamp.us. If you'd like to connect with me on Twitter, you can do so at Steve Glaveski. That's Glaveski. Until next time, keep innovating. Future Squared out.